Tonight, Chavdalet Kislev, the 24th of the month of Kislev, marks the end of the 30-day mourning period, the Shloshim, for my cousin Rose Lubin, Hashem Yikom Dama. Tonight in Atlanta, her friends and family are going to gather and remember Rose and share stories about her and learn Torah in her memory. I wanted to add my words of Torah to theirs so that we can all learn in memory of Rose Elishev, bat Chaim, Vנחama. I hope that by spreading this video around, we'll all learn in her memory. We're here on Erev Chanukah, the night before Chanukah, so I thought it would be very appropriate to talk a little bit about Chanukah in my shir. I've titled the shir, Chanukah, the Chag of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what exactly is Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah? It's very easy to describe the written Torah because it is what we have written down. The 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the writings, that's the written Torah. We also have other Torah that we have in books on our shelves, but it's actually considered the oral Torah. And by this I'm referring to the Mishnah and the Gemara, the Talmud and the Mishnah. These are books of oral law that have been written down. The Mishnah was actually written down around the year 200 in Israel by Rav Yehuda Nasi. And he wrote it down because the people had started going into exile, the academies had broken up a bit, and there wasn't a direct line of transmission of the oral law. So he knew that instead, in order not to lose track of the oral tradition, it needed to be written down. But the way he wrote it down was sometimes very cryptic, and it really needed to be learned with a teacher. And these were the teachings of the Talmud. And then about 300 years later in Babylonia, Ravina and Rav Ashi also had the same feeling that the transmission was getting lost and it needed to be written down. And they wrote down the Talmud. But this practice of transmitting from a teacher to a student is the basis of Jewish learning tradition. And it still goes on to this day. So really anything that we learn with a teacher is considered the oral tradition. So why do I say that Chanukah is specifically the holiday of the oral law? So Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who was a 20th century Torah figure, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn. He wrote a sefer called the Pachad Yitzchak. He actually didn't write the sefer. The sefer is based on his Yiddish drashot, his Yiddish teachings on the holidays. It was actually translated to Hebrew. His words of Torah were translated to Hebrew and edited and written down by his only child, his daughter, Rabbanit Bruria David. And the book is from around the 1960s. It's called the Pachad Yitzchak, and sometimes Rav Hutner is known by the name of his sefer, the Pachad Yitzchak. And he writes, oh, by the way, there's a source sheet that goes with this shiur. It's available on Sefaria. When I'm sharing the link to the shiur, I'll also share the link to the source sheet. But if you get this video without the source sheet, it's understandable without the source sheet, but you can take a look on Sefaria and look for it. So the Pachad Yitzchak says, Gam la'achar shenichteva ha'mishnah, adayin hishiru ba makom b'tzurat Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what I explained, even after the Mishnah was written down, they left room for the shape of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Uvener Chanukah bahu ha'inyan hazeh lidei hashmata gmura. And this is particularly apparent on Chanukah, Ner Chanukah, mipnei she'oro shel Ner Chanukah hu ha'or sheyitgale al yedei mesirut nefesh al orot miniat ktivatam shel dvarim sheba'al peh. Because the light of Chanukah is particularly revealed through the Mesirut Nefesh, the ways that people were fighting to prevent writing down of things that should only be בעל פה, should only be oral. בכדי שעל ידי זה תסתלק יוון מלהחשיך עיניהם של ישראל על ידי תרגום דברים שבעל פה. So he's referring here to the translation of the Torah into Greek, because during the time period of the Hashmonaim, the Greeks wanted to translate the written Torah into Greek, and it was done. That's a story for a different time. But with every translation comes an interpretation, and Rav Hutner says that this is the basis of the miracle of Chanukah, of the war of Chanukah, was against these types of interpretations into Greek, and this was the basis of the war against the Greeks. I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction, but what I found very interesting here was his note that the place where the Mishnah shows its lacuna, shows that it's still an oral tradition, is with Chanukah. There's another place that is also mentioned in the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Chav Tet Amud Aleph. Amar Rab Asi, Lama Nimshala Esther l'Shachar. Why is it the book of Esther, or Esther herself, compared to the dawn? Lomar lecha ma shachar sof kol halayla, af Esther sof kol hanisim. In the same way that the dawn is the end of the night, Esther is the end of all miracles. And then the Gemara immediately questions, V'ha ika Chanukah, but we have the miracle of Chanukah. Nitna lichtov ka'amrinan. So what we're talking about is miracles that were meant to be written down. So Esther is the last miracle that's written down. And indeed we have the book of Esther, which is a canonical book. There is the book of the Maccabees. There are several books of Maccabees where all of the deeds of the Hashmonaim were written down, but those are not canonical books. They're outside the canon, outside of the written law. So here, the Gemara in Yuma is telling us that Chanukah is something that is a miracle, but it is an unwritten miracle. And that, again, gives us a dimension into saying that Chanukah is the holiday of the oral tradition. And what I wanted to look with you tonight is to look through, there are only 7 Mishnayot where Hanukkah is mentioned. Unlike other holidays, there is no tractate of Hanukkah. Mentioning Esther, we do have an entire tractate called Megillah, which deals with the writing of the scroll of Esther, the holiday of Purim. It also deals with other topics, as we find in the Mishnah and the Gemara, but there is an entire tractate devoted to Purim. There's a tractate devoted to Rosh Hashanah and to Sukkot and to Yom Kippur and to Pesach, but there is no tractate of Hanukkah. And in addition to that, there's not even very many Mishnayot that refer to Hanukkah. So what we're going to do tonight is go through all of the Mishnayot that mention Hanukkah. And if we only had those collection of Mishnayot, to try to see what will we know about this holiday. So the first, and this is also appropriate for learning in memory of Rose, because when learning in memory of someone, it is traditional to learn Mishnayot. Some people have said that Mishnayot are the letters of Mishnah, Mem, Shin, Nun, Hey. If you reverse the letters, it spells Neshama, Nun, Shin, Mem, Hey, Neshama being the soul. So learning Mishnah is particularly appropriate for elevating the soul of the person. So again, I would like to dedicate the learning of these Mishnayot in memory of Rus Elisheва bat Chaim David v'Nachama Rachel. And so we're going to get started with the Mishnah. I mentioned earlier was written in the year 200. It's divided into 6 tractates. Not 6 tractates, 6 sidarim, 6 sections, and each section has tractates. So the 6 orders of the Mishnah are Zra'im, which deals with agricultural themes, Moed, which are the holidays, Nashim, dealing with issues of women, marriage, and divorce, and other various topics, Nizikin, which is what we're learning in Daf Yomi these days, which deals with all kinds of torts and property law, and so that's Nizikin. Kodshim, which is mostly about sacrifices, and also the laws of kashrut are in there, and Taharot, which deals with ritual purity. So those are the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Within each order are different tractates. So the first time that Chanukah is mentioned is actually in the Seder of Zra'im, the agricultural order, and in the Mishnah of Bikurim. The Mishnayot of Bikurim discuss bringing the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash. So in Mishnah Bikurim, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav, I didn't quote the entire, in all the other cases we're going to learn the entire Mishnah. Here the Mishnah is very long and only the last part of it has to do with our topic, so I only quoted a section of the Mishnah here. It says, Me'atzeret v'ad hechag mevi v'korei. So from Shavuot until Sukkot, a person brings their first fruits and reads the special paragraph that you're supposed to read. Min hachag ve'ad Chanukah mevi ve'eno korei. From Sukkot, the holiday here that's mentioned is Sukkot, from Sukkot until Chanukah, he can bring his first fruits, but he does not read the accompanying paragraph. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera omer mevi v'korei. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera has a dissenting opinion and says that he would bring and also read the accompanying paragraph. But all we know about Chanukah here is that it is a date that's sometime after Sukkot, and presumably before Pesach, because at Pesach the agricultural year begins again. So from this, we only know that Chanukah is sometime during the winter. We don't have an exact date. Moving along to the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah. Now we've moved orders of Mishnah. We're in the order of Moed, talking about all the holidays. And the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Gimel, says, Al Shisha Chodashim Hashluchim Yotzin. So before they had the set calendar, witnesses had to witness the new moon and come before the Beit Din, the high court in Jerusalem, and bring their testimony that they had seen the new moon. Once the testimony was approved, messengers would be sent out to the entire Jewish people saying that the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim had declared the new month. And then everybody would know when to celebrate the holidays. So this Mishnah tells us that the messengers would go out not about every one of the 12 months, but about 6 of the months. Al Nisan mipnei Pesach, about the month of Nisan because of the holiday of Pesach that would fall on the 15th of that month. It doesn't say that, but we know that they would count to the 14th would be Erev Pesach. Al Av mipnei Hatanit. This is already after the destruction of the temple, because they would go out in the month of Av because of the fast that falls in Av. That's Tisha B'Av. Notice that they didn't need to go out for Shavuot, because we know that we count from the second day of Pesach for 50 days and we end up at Shavuot. So we don't need to know when Rosh Chodesh, Iyar, and Sivan were, because it doesn't make a difference for the holidays. Al Elul mipnei Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah falls on Rosh Chodesh. So a messenger on that day wouldn't help anything, but they would go out for the month of Elul, and that way they would know about when Rosh Hashanah is. That's also why we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, because there would be a little bit of uncertainty still there. Al Tishrei mipnei takanat hamoadot. Then after Rosh Hashanah, the messengers would go out about Tishrei retroactively so that they could set the rest of the holidays, meaning Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Al Kislev mipnei Chanukah. And they would also send out messengers on Kislev because of Chanukah, V'al Adar mipnei HaPurim, and during the month of Adar, for Rosh Chodesh Adar because of Purim. Ukshaya Beit HaMikdash Kayam Yotzin Af Al Iyar mipnei Pesach Katan. And this says when there was a Beit HaMikdash, they would also go out on a 7th month for Rosh Chodesh Iyar, because then they would have the second Pesach. Okay, so from this Mishnah, we know a little bit more about Hanukkah. We know that it happens in Kislev. We still don't have an exact date in Kislev, but we know that it's far enough away from the beginning of Kislev that messengers would be able to get there. And from the other holidays in this Mishnah, we know that it's probably after the 10th of Kislev, because by the 10th of Tishrei, the messengers would get there and they would know about Yom Kippur. So Hanukkah definitely happens after the 10th of Kislev, but we don't know an exact date. We also know that it's important enough of a holiday to warrant an announcement. So there's something that's going to happen on this date in Kislev that we want the people to know about. Now we're moving on to the next tractate Ta'anit. This is still in the order of Moed. Most of the Mishnayot are going to be in Moed. En gozrin Ta'anit al tzibor b'Rosh Chodesh b'Chanukah u'v'Purim. So we don't decree a fast day on the community on Rosh Chodesh, on Chanukah, and on Purim. I'm actually not going to read the rest of this Mishnah, but I'm just going to explain that during the winter, it was very common for the Beit Din, for the court, to declare a fast day if there was a lack of rain. So Chanukah and Purim are holidays that happen during the rainy season, so it's very possible that one of the fast days could be set for Hanukkah or Purim, or one of the Rosh Chodeshim, and we say that is not allowed. So we know that Hanukkah, Purim, and Rosh Chodesh all fall into a similar category, that they're holidays that where we do not fast. We have a prohibition against fasting. Okay. Moving along, there's actually two Mishnayot in Masechet Megillah. We said that Megillah is the tractate that talks about Purim, but it also talks about, in general, when we read the Torah. So Mishnah Megillah, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Daled. In some versions of the Mishnah, this might be Perek Daled, because Parakim Gimel and Daled get reversed in Masechet Megillah. But not important for us right now. It says, Rosh Chodesh Adar, shechal liot b'Shabbat, korin b'Parshat Shkalim. Chal liot b'toch HaShabbat, makdimin l'sha'avar, u'mafsikin l'Shabbat acheret. B'shniya zachor, b'shlishit para aduma, b'revi'it hachodesh hazeh lachem, b'chamishit chozin l'kisidran. Lako mafsikin b'Rashi Chodeshim b'Chanukah u'v'Purim b'Ta'aniyot u'v'Ma'amadot u'v'Yom HaKippurim. So I'm not going to explain this in word by word, but this is the first place that the Mishnah talks about special Torah readings. So it doesn't say what Sidran is, what the general Torah reading schedule is like, but we know that for these specific dates, we stop in the regularly scheduled Torah reading and we read something else. So the first things it talks about are the Arba Parshiot, the four. We read them as a special maftir leading up to Pesach. There's 4 special weeks between Rosh Chodesh Adar and Pesach, reading these special maftirs. It's possible that at a different time in history it was read instead of Parshat Shavua, but I'm not going to get into that. Then it also says at the end of the Mishnah, for all of these days, we stop the regular scheduled Torah reading for Rosh Chodesh, for Chanukah, and for Purim. Also for a Ta'anit, for a public fast day. For Ma'amadot, which is something different that was only in the Beit HaMikdash. And for Yom Kippur. In Yom Kippur, it means before this, it actually talked about, it's after this. The next Mishnah talks about what Torah readings are during the festivals. Yom Kippur is, of course, a festival. So here it's actually talking about Mincha of Yom Kippur. If Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, then the regular reading of Shabbat Mincha is pushed off for the reading of Yom Kippur. And then the next Mishnah, so from this Mishnah, we know that we read Torah on Chanukah. Chanukah is a day that we read Torah, and it's important enough that we push off any regular scheduled Torah reading. The Mishnah Vav, 2 Mishnayot later, says, B'Chanukah b'Nesiim. So this is the list of what we read on these special days. And on Chanukah, we read the section of the Nesiim. This is in Bamidbar, where each day the 12 princes brought something to dedicate the tabernacle, specifically the Mizbeach, the altar of the tabernacle. There's actually a very interesting Ramban, a very long and interesting Ramban, which talks about why we read from this section in particular on Chanukah. A prosaic reason would be because that's what has enough days. There's 12 Nesiim, there's 8 days of Chanukah. There's no other section in Torah where you would be able to read something different for 8 days in a row. And we actually, on the 8th day of Hanukkah, we finish up all of the Nesiim because we wouldn't want to leave anybody out. So there's really 12, there are not 12 days of Hanukkah, but there's 8 days of Hanukkah, there's 12 Nesiim. We read them all on Hanukkah. And I'm not going to finish reading this Mishnah. Okay. And now the last Mishnah in Seder Moed is a Mishnah for Moed Katan. This is actually the final Mishnah of the entire order of Moed. Moed Katan talks about the halachot of Chol HaMoed. Because Chol HaMoed has the status of being kind of a half holiday. There's things that we're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed that we would not be allowed to do on a Yom Tov, but there's also things that we prevent ourselves from doing so that we can still have a taste of Moed, of a Yom Tov. Some of these things that are where Chol HaMoed is different than a regular weekday have to do with mourning. So in this Mishnah, it says, B'Rashei Chodashim, B'Chanukah, U'V'Purim, Ma'anot U'Mitapchot. The Mishnah before, this is Moed Katan, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Tet. In Mishnah Chet, it talked about Chol HaMoed, and it said, mourners on Chol HaMoed, the women that come to mourn, Me'anot, they keen, but they don't mitapchot, but they don't mitapchot, they don't bang on things. In our Mishnah, it says on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, and Purim, again that triumvirate, the women me'onot, and they also mitapchot, they keen and they also bang on things. Bezeh uvezeh, meaning on Chol HaMoed and on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, and Purim, no. Aval lo makonenot. They don't have a call and response sort of keening. It would be like, the women would say like, "Woe unto the death of this person," and then all the women would answer back in a call and response method. So on bezeh uvezeh aval lo makonenot. So on both Chol HaMoed and Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, and Purim, they don't do that, because again, like that we saw that these are not days of fasting. They're also not days of mourning. I think this is an appropriate place to put in that tonight they're also marking the Shloshim of my son's principal, Yossi Hershkovitz, Hashem Yikom Domo, because his Shloshim actually falls on Chanukah. And since Chanukah are not days of mourning and eulogies, the school Pelech is marking the Shloshim tonight as well. And our learning should also be in his memory. I'm skipping to the end of this Mishnah, which just ends. How do we know? The Mishnah goes into what ma'anot and what kina is, but I explained that outside. And it just ends with a beautiful phrase of Allah atid lavo, hu omer bila hamavet lenetzach. That Yeshayahu, Isaiah prophecies that in the future there will be no more death. Death will be defeated forever, and God will wipe away the tears from every face. So that is a good wish for all of us in our mourning here. And I wish I could end the shir right then, but we have one last Mishnah to look at for Chanukah. Now, what have we not mentioned at all so far? I mean, there's several things that we haven't mentioned, but one striking omission so far has been Hanukkah candles. The mitzvah that we associate the most with Hanukkah is the oil, the lights, the lighting of the Hanukkah candles, and that has not been mentioned anywhere so far. So to find our Hanukkah candles, we have to go all the way to the order of Nezikin, to damages. It's a Mishnah in Baba Kama, the tractate that we're learning in Daf Yomi right now, but we're not at this parak. This is Parak Vav, Mishnah Vav, the 6th chapter, the 6th Mishnah. Very easy to remember if anyone wants to remember a trivia question. Where is Hanukkah mentioned in Baba Kama? It's 6:6. So the Mishnah says, Getz sheyatza mitachat hapatish v'hizik chayav. A spark that goes out from under a hammer and causes damage. The owner of the hammer, the person who made the spark, is obligated. He's obligated to pay damages. Gamal shehaya ta'un pishtan va'avar bershut harabim v'nichnas pishtono letoch hachanut v'delku b'neiro shel chenvani v'hidlik et habira bal hagamal chayav. So the next case, we have a camel who is loaded up with flax, and it's going on his way in a public thoroughfare. But the flax is piled up so high on the camel that it enters a storefront that's standing next to the public thoroughfare. So the storefront is a private domain of someone. The storekeeper has a nair. He has a light, a lamp lit, and the flax catches fire from the lamp that's in the store and sends the whole thing up in flames. So in that case, the owner of the camel is obligated to pay damages to the storekeeper because his camel, although his camel was walking in a public place, it caused damage in a private domain. If the same thing happened, but the lamp of the storekeeper was actually outside the store, so then the storekeeper is obligated to pay the damages because he took his private lamp and put it in a public thoroughfare. At the very end of the Mishnah, we see Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'ner Chanukah Patur. If the storekeeper is putting his lamp outside because it is a Hanukkah lamp and everything catches fire, so then he's patur. He's not obligated to pay the damages. So Rabbi Yehuda must know that there's something about this Ner Chanukah that would negate the law of damages that we just learned. And that is that the Ner Chanukah is a mitzvah, because we can't say that we have a mitzvah that you're not able to do, because everybody would be afraid to put their lamps outside if they're going to be obligated for damages. So in the case of the Hanukkah lamp, you're not obligated if somebody catches fire. We could talk a lot about trying b'chol zot to make your Hanukkah lamps fireproof, or the proper way to protect other people. But the point of this Mishnah is that there is such a thing as a Hanukkah lamp, and it is a mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah to put it outside. It's not enough. Like, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're assuming that the storekeeper is going to put his Hanukkah lamp outside of his store in the public space. And this brings us to the mitzvah of Hanukkah, that it's a mitzvah to be outside with these lamps. So if you were in my class tonight, I would ask you, what things are we missing in our description of Hanukkah? If we only had these 7 Mishnayot, we learned that Hanukkah is a date in the winter, in Kislev. We still don't know the exact date of Hanukkah. We know that it's a happy time. It's a time when we do not have eulogies, when we don't have public fast days, when we do have Torah reading. We don't know that we say Hallel on Hanukkah. That's something that comes up later in the Gemara. We know that Hanukkah is similar to Purim and to Rosh Chodesh. In a lot of ways, we see them together as a triumvirate. So we can assume that on Rosh Chodesh there's Hallel, but on Purim there's not Hallel, so maybe we could deduce from there, but we don't know for sure. We do not know anything about the story of Hanukkah. Why do we have this holiday? That is not answered at all. And we know from this very obscure Mishnah in Baba Kama that there is such a thing as a Ner Chanukah. We guess that we need to put it outside where it could be dangerous, but we have to put it outside anyway. But we don't know any other details of that mitzvah. Is there only one Hanukkah lamp? Are there many Hanukkah lamps? We also don't actually know how long Hanukkah lasts. It could be one day, like Purim, except that we do have the reading from the Nisim, but maybe it's 12 days. So we don't know any of that. So all of that would be the contents of the oral tradition. There is one place where a lot of these things are explained. There's something that's called Megillat Ta'anit. Now, yes, we've heard the word Ta'anit before. Megillat Ta'anit is not a Megillah that you read on fast days. It was actually a late Second Temple document which recorded all the days where fasting was prohibited. These were different days and some days where fast days were declared, but mostly it was days that were observed during the Second Temple as days that we were not allowed to fast. And it goes through the entire year and explains what happened on those days. On the source sheet is the entire text of Megillat Ta'anit. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's pretty long. But I will read the beginning of it. It says, we're skipping one source on the source sheet and going to the next source. It says, B'chaf Hei Bei. So the title would be Kislev. And it says, B'chaf Hei Bei, on the 25th of the month, Yom Chanukah is the day of Hanukkah, Tamanya Yomim, 8 days, Delo Lemispad, 8 days with no eulogies. So that's the title of this piece. And then it continues telling us the entire story. the story that the Greeks went into the temple and they disgraced the temple. They made everything impure. And then the story of the Pach Shemen, that when the Chashmonaim returned and had victory over the Greeks, they purified the temple and then found only one cruse of oil where they could where that would be appropriate to light the menorah in the temple. It goes through the entire story, and then it says that because of that, in later years, this was celebrated as a holiday, and it also mentions Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the different opinions of if we should light in ascending order or descending order, that each person in the house lights the Chanukah lights, and basically the entire story. It's very, very similar to our text of Al Hanisim that we say, that we add in the Shmona Esrei. But that text is also an external text. It's not part of the Mishnah. It's not part of any canonical text. It's something that we have nowadays a lot from Geniza fragments, but it's not something. So how, in rabbinic literature, how do we know about Hanukkah? So this is what, if you ask any yeshiva bachar, they'll say, "My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah?" That is a section of Talmud, which is in Masechet Shabbat. So Masechet Shabbat, the tractate of Shabbat, is also back in Moed, in the Seder of Moed, that talks about holidays. And in the section where it talks about what wicks and oils are appropriate for lighting Shabbat candles, derech agav, in a roundabout sort of way, it gets to Hanukkah. It says, well, if you're going to light Shabbat candles with this, you can definitely light Hanukkah candles with this. And there's actually differences between Hanukkah candles and Shabbat candles, and that's how it brings up the whole topic of Hanukkah. And if we're talking about Hanukkah anyway, we might as well ask, well, what is Hanukkah? That's what my Hanukkah means. What is Hanukkah? And so on your source sheet, the one right after the last Mishnah, on Shabbat, page 21, the second side of the page, Chaf Aleph Amud Bet, says, my Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? Ditanu Rabbanan, that we learned in a Breita. A Breita is something external to the Mishnah, and we're going to come back to this in a minute. B'kaf He B'Kislev Yomei T'Chanukah Tamanya. On the 25th of Kislev, there are 8 days of Hanukkah, sounding very similar to the text of Megillat Ta'anit. Yomei Hanukkah Tamanya Inon, Delo L'Misped Behon, Udelo L'Hitanot Behon, that we don't have eulogies and we don't fast on them. Shek Shenichnesu Yevanim Lehechal, Tam'u Kol Hashmanim, that when the Greeks entered the temple, they desecrated all of the oils that were in the temple. And when the Malchut Beit Chashmonai, the Chashmonaim, overcame them and had a victory over the Greeks, they looked around and they only found one cruse of oil that was sealed by the Kohen Gadol, and it could only last for one day. A miracle occurred, and they were able to light from that cruse of oil for 8 days. So the next year, or the years afterwards, they were set as days Yom Tov, of Hallel, and of praise and thanks to God. And then the Gemara goes on for the next 3 pages and discusses the details of the Mishnah, of the mitzvah of Chanukah, what exactly we do on Chanukah, how we light the candles, who lights the candles, and that we say Hallel, that we say a full Hallel. So all that happens in the Gemara. So what we've seen so far is that the Mishnah is very sparing in its details of Chanukah, and we learn it in a lot of roundabout ways. We only get the full story in a Breita, an external teaching that is brought in Masechet Shabbat. There's actually a Hasidic teaching that I want to end with from the Koznitzer Maggid in his book Avodat Yisrael. He says, Kabbalistically, the Mishnah is internal to the Jewish people. All of these Mishnayot are very personal, a very internal thing. And Chanukah is the holiday where we celebrate being external. The main mitzvah of Chanukah is Pirsumei Nisa, to publicize the miracle, to go outside, to put your Chanukah lamps outside in the public thoroughfare, even if there is a danger of lighting something on fire. It's a mitzvah to go out and to express that publicly. And he says that's why the main details of Chanukah are told in Breitot, because Breitot are external things. And so Chanukah is about spreading the light. So I hope that in the coming days we again see a miracle, and we are able to overcome our enemies and spread the light and be enriched by the words of Torah and by the light. And may this be in memory of Rose Eliseva, bat Chaim David v'Nachama Rachel, and also in memory of Yossi Hershkovitz, and all of the brave soldiers who have died fighting for what we believe in. And it should be for Refuah Shlema for all of those injured, and for a speedy return of all of the hostages still in Gaza. Thank you.